and welcome to South Orange Public Library. My name is Keisha Miller. I'm the teen librarian and volunteer coordinator. And as we celebrate Black History Month, health and wellness is the theme this year. We are so very delighted to welcome one of two authors we'll be having this week. Mr. Steve Majors is joining us this evening with his memoir, Hi, Yella. And according to a recent article in Forbes, this is a multi-flavored family memoir of race, love, and loss. And so we are very happy to have Mr. Majors with us this evening. But in my introduction, I also want to share with you our moderator, who is Sarah Doneghy. She's an actor, a writer, and the host of, the show Mixed Messages, which is available on YouTube. It's a show where every guest discusses their mixed race experience. So she'll be joining us shortly, but back to Mr. Majors now. Hi, Yella. I was born a Black child. Fans of writer and actor Steve Martin's early work will recognize those words from his 1979 comedy, The Jerk. Readers of Steve Majors' powerful family memoir, Hi, Yella, learn early on that the author used this memorable line in a key moment of courtship. Majors is 55 years old. He's a light-skinned, cisgender Black gay man from upstate New York, who was the youngest of 5 children. Majors is a former television news journalist who worked at NBC News, MSNBC, as well as CNBC. His essays on race and culture and identity have appeared in the New York Times and Washington Post. We are so very delighted to have Mr. Majors join us this evening. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, our moderator for the evening, and welcome to all of you. And I hope you enjoy the discussion. Sarah?
Thank you, Keisha. Thank you. All right. I'm Steve. Welcome. I'm so excited to talk with you. I've read the book twice and I'm a fan. I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
So you're here to discuss Hi, Yella. Tell the people, just in case someone doesn't know, what Hi, Yella means.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to the South Orange Public Library for inviting me tonight. I'll start by showing the cover of the book, which includes the title, Hi, Yella. And it may be helpful for me to just sort of point myself out in my family picture. This is me right here as a young boy, and this is my family around me. And as you can see from my family portrait, the cover of the book, my complexion is decidedly much lighter than that of my family. And Hi, Yella is a term that generally is pretty well commonly known in the Black community. And it's meant to convey this idea that someone's skin complexion in the Black community is very light skinned. So that could be someone who is light skinned Black, so that could be someone who is mixed race and light skin. That may be, and the term we might use today is white passing or white presenting, but it's a term with quite a bit of history in the Black community. And Hi, Yella is meant to convey, again, very light complexion, Black or mixed race person. Mm-hmm.
And it was your grandmother that called you that, correct?
Yeah, it is. And I will tell you that, the term, I'd say she used it with probably a little bit of loving and endearment in it, but it was a term, Sarah, I think that a name that really caused me quite a bit of confusion because for a good part of my life, my family refused to admit that I was mixed race.
Right.
In my upbringing and everything that they told me that I was Black and that I had the same father as my siblings, but that my skin color was just different. And so Hi, Yella was a term that probably caused me quite a bit of confusion growing up. And that's what the book is about. It's about my search for identity growing up in a Black family. But the second line of the book, A Modern Family Memoir, it's also about my family today. I am a gay man who's married to someone who is Jewish, And we have two children who are adopted, who are both Black. One appears Black, the other is mixed race and probably has a complexion a little bit closer to mine. And so the story, Yella, Modern Family Memoir, is about two families and the search for identity within those families and within our place in the world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And what I love about it is that the family you grew up with and your chosen family now reflect each other often, come together. Like the past, the present reflects the past a lot. And that's yeah, and intertwines and often meets.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about the book in the past, and for folks who have not picked up the book, it's not all of it is not in chronological order. It is sort of an intertwining timeline. So it is the story of my childhood, and that is told in chronological order, and the story of the formation and growth of my family today. But the chapters are organized in parallel. And so that was done with quite a bit of intention, because as I thought about sort of the struggles that my family today, my chosen family, the struggles that we have been through, I could see that there were similarities, there were common themes, things that we were wrestling with today that I could harken back and look at and realize that I was struggling with some of those same issues as a child.
And before we get into the content, I want to know, what made you want to write this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I got to the point, well, I didn't set out to write a book. I didn't say, I'm going to write a memoir. Some of this writing really began as private journaling. And then that I posted a couple of blogs and got some positive feedback. And I think, Sarah, I was working out some of my issues, like, as we all do. I was working out some of my childhood issues and how they were still presenting to me in my life today. And as I looked at the body of work, some of the private journal stories that I had written, some of the public blogging, I began to see meaning in it. And so this book really was a way for me to make meaning of these experiences, and with the hope that others who have read it, even though their stories or their family stories were not so much like mine, I thought that there were themes about family and identity and trauma and race and class that might speak to other people.
Yeah, very much so. I'll say yes. Okay. I mean, Steve, your characters are so alive and relatable and layered, and I mean they're humans. And okay, let's talk about some of those people.
Sure.
Let's talk about how you open the book. You open with Pops.
Yeah.
Tell me a little about Pops.
Sure. So Pops was the man who was the father of my siblings, who I was taught from my earliest memory that he was my father. I could clearly see that this man, well, I think very early on, I could see that my family looked different than me, that he looked different from me. And I would say that he was a very seminal figure in my life, even though he was not there past the age of 7 or 8. This was a man who dealt with quite a bit of abuse, or he dealt with quite a bit of addiction. He was abusive. He was alcoholic. He was an odd man. And I can read a little bit from the book to kind of give folks a little bit of the flavor of it, if that helps.
Oh, let's go.
And this also gives you a little bit of flavor of him and his own family. And I hope that gives you a sense of sort of, why I sort of revisited some of these issues in the past. I'll start sort of in the middle of the chapter, but I think this gives you a good flavor. It begins with Pops driving me in a station wagon in the early 1970s through the middle of our small town. As we passed into the south side of town, Pops careened over the railroad tracks. I'd look behind, wondering if we'd left behind a part of the car. But Pops looked straight ahead as he pulled up to a rotting rooming house. I recognized it as a place where Pops's family lived, along some of the other families who looked like mine. Gotta take a quick piss, Pops announced. My stomach tightened. I feared these visits to his family. Normally, if my mother, was here, I'd stick to her side or try to hold on tight to one of my brother's belt loops. Today, I was on my own. I worried Pops might forget me and leave me behind. Open the goddamn door, I'm thirsty, Pops yelled as we neared the top of the stairs of the rooming house. His father, a shriveled, dark-skinned man we called Grandpappy, met us at the door. Behind him, slumped on raggedy furniture, were the rest of the Majors clan, Pops's brother Clarence and his two sisters. As we walked in, I shrank into a nearby corner. The dim room smelled like fresh pee and old throw-up. What's this bright yellow boy scared of? Grandpappy asked. Purple gums showed through his rubbery lips because he'd taken out his dentures. I said, what you afraid of, boy? He looked at me and laughed until he began to cough up brown phlegm into a dirty handkerchief. Then he looked around for his bottle of booze to clear his throat. I could see it had fallen off a table and rolled underneath. When I pointed it out, Grandpappy got down on his ancient knees to retrieve it and let out a string of curses. The bottle was empty. He'd apparently taken the last swig and been too drunk to notice. As he lay half under the table to mourn his lost liquor, his grown kids staggered to their own feet to watch him. Like half-crocked blackbirds, they crowed with laughter. Get your tired old ass off the floor, one of my aunties yelled. Grandpappy dragged himself up. It seemed to take forever, but once up, he moved like a cat. Before anyone could run for cover, he stretched back a wrinkled arm and hurled the empty bottle toward us. It missed. I had learned what to expect next. Fists and furniture were about to fly, like they often did at my own home. But here, I couldn't tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys. Pops pushed me behind the couch. I closed my eyes and prayed God would keep me safe. If he did, I thought maybe I could at least depend on Pops to take me home to Mom. I listened to the sound of crashes and cusses moving from one side of the room to the next. I squirmed around and pressed my face to the wall, hoping to stay out of harm's way. But even here, I could feel the ratty couch buckling and sliding against my back when the fight moved closer to me. It seemed at any time the breath might be squeezed out of me. Finally, the wild wrestling stopped. After a few minutes, I opened my eyes and came out from my hiding place. Grandpappy and his kids lay sprawled across the floor or slumped back in their chairs. I didn't know if they were knocked out or just passed out. But Pops was still standing, and I felt relieved. He grabbed me by the hand and yanked me along. As he slammed out the door, I heard him mutter, well, I'm going to use a cuss word here, so cover your ears. Stupid cocksuckers. I knew God wouldn't like it, but in my head, I agreed with him.
Nice. And I just have to say, you open the book like this. So it's like, bam, like no small talk. No, well, I grew up, boom, here it is. And I'll say, Steve, the thing about this is, and it's something you said you inherited from your family. It's using humor in the most tragic of circumstances and situations. And the thing is, the way you write Pops, there's a lot of me that likes him at first. And you could really, I'm just like, he wants you to be in a band. He plays music, and then just how he wants to be accepted, and it's incredible that you could do that with such a problematic, if not the most problematic character.
Yeah, and I have to remind myself that he was I was 5, maybe 6 from that memory. And, to me, he was a towering figure, and he could be very charismatic. and very convincing to people. But behind closed doors, there was another much darker side of him. And the evil that he perpetrated on our family, it's inexcusable. And so I did, but even so, there are very few truly evil people in this world. I think there are a lot of people, more people who do truly evil things. And what I'd hope to do in this book is to provide sort of a three-dimensional look at someone, to be able to say, yes, there were times that, I trusted Pops and felt that he was the only person keeping me safe. But there were other times where this was a man who I knew was a direct threat to the safety of myself and my entire family.
And I want to talk about, tell us where you grew up, what it was, where exactly it was. And
yeah. So I talk a lot of the book about standing out from my own family, but then I make the point that my family stood out amongst the community that we lived in. So I grew up in Western New York, in a very small town between Buffalo and Rochester, and literally in the middle of cornfields. And this was a rural white farming community. And we were one of the few Black families in that community. And we were even more isolated, I would say, because we lived on a hill. And I talk about the fact that my family lived in one house, and on one side, my grandmother and her companion lived on another, and my aunt lived on the other side. So we were in this sort of secluded enclave in the middle of cornfields. And so while I would like to say that we may have felt safe because we were our own community, I also felt like we probably were, by self-isolating, we were our own worst enemies, because all we had with each other. And so all of the dynamics really played out only amongst ourselves. And it wasn't just that sort of, it wasn't as if the community had isolated us. We had self-isolated ourselves. And I don't think that was healthy for us either.
And all right. So I want to talk about, so you were told, I want to talk about something you said earlier. You were always told growing up, no, you're Black, your dad, your Pops is your dad. And reading the book, when you would, I mean, there's a part where you look at your skin, you look at their skin, and you're like, as a kid, you're like, I don't think so, no. And there's a scene where you get in the car from school and you ask if you're adopted. And that was, or actually you asked your sister first, and she told on you. And it was a very bad thing to even ask. So you weren't even able to be curious, correct?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll betray a little part of this book. I'm not adopted. And that is one of the mysteries of the story. But as a little boy, I could not imagine any other way that I could have become part of this family other than to have been adopted into it. And that was, it was something that I guess it was probably one of the worst things I could have said, that to my mother, to my siblings, that I was somehow not part of them, that I was not blood or kin to them, that I was adopted, which is remarkable because it's how I formed my own family.
Exactly.
And so, but yes, I would say, for many years, although I knew the truth, it was until I was really, until just a few years ago, that I had confirmation that Pops was not my father, even though it would defy sort of logic. Now, having said that, you and I know, as people of color, and if there are people of color in the audience, that there are many, it is a genetic lottery. There are dark-skinned parents who give birth to lighter-skinned children. That can happen. but I always had a sense for some reason that I was not fully related to my siblings, and that Pops was not my father, but I was never really allowed to ask that.
Yeah. Now, I will say, okay, you said you a few years ago you got confirmation. However, there is a part of the book that also stands out, and it's when I think maybe you're around 18 when you told your mom you thought you were gay. And much like I think I'm mixed or I think I'm adopted, that was dismissed. And interestingly, what came out of that was you heard a little about your biological father.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think about, and I don't want to give away too much of the book, and hopefully y'all will read it, but I think in that moment where my mother was denying a part of my identity that I also felt truth about, and she denied that, the only thing that I could cling on to was to say, well, but that you say that this is not true, that I'm not gay, but I know that Pops is not my father, and sort of challenging her.
Yeah.
And making her to sort of concede on that point if she would. And she didn't concede much.
Right.
She did
right.
concede a little bit of information. But my mother, who I love dearly, and really is the reason why I'd like to think I'm a healthier and happier person today than how I could have turned out to be. Felt quite a bit of shame. And it has taken me a long time to understand that too, and to forgive her for that. And it's only as an adult, I think, that children really have grace or feel grace or give grace to their parents for the choices that they made, for the mistakes that happened. You really understand in a way that you don't as a child.
Did writing this book help you to understand?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think, again, I go back to why I wrote it. I needed to make meaning of it. As I began to parent and I began to struggle in my own parenting, I needed to make meaning, because who are the people, how do you learn to parent? You look towards your own parents, or you look towards the examples of your own family. And when you're struggling as a parent yourself, you look back and you say, well, why am I struggling? And why is this hard for me? And why is this an issue for me? And I had to kind of bring those two worlds together in order to make meaning for myself and my own children.
Yeah. And you do nearly right away, because as soon as we find out about Pops, you start with a fight in your family. And it's very raw and in your face. And again, no small talk.
Yeah.
What made you want to go there with the book? Like you were very raw. So
yeah. Well, I think, again, I'm 55 now. And you live a life of sort of secrets, and so many secrets about your past and your family, and even secrets today of, like, you never know what's going on behind closed doors in anyone's home and the things that they are struggling with. And we were struggling and mightily. And I felt like if I was going to be able to tell the truth about the family that I was born into, good and bad, I had to be willing to tell the truth about my own family today, good and bad.
Yeah.
And, it gave me a great perspective as well. I was doing the best that I could, was doing the best that I knew how. And I'm now able to see that my mother, she was doing the best that she could. she was only doing what she knew.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt it would have been inauthentic for me to write a book. And I've said this before, what I did not want to write a book is about Black family trauma, right? And I think if I had written the book just about the family that I was born into, I might have run the risk of it ending at a point and saying, well, you know, you're opening the window to all of these folks, things that happened in the past. You're saying things that could put them in a negative light. You can't be perfect. And my point is, I'm not perfect.
Mm-hmm,
and I'm willing to open a door and let folks see into my world today and demonstrate that I'm not perfect as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's commendable. And you really, yeah, you write yourself as that too, as layered. Like, yeah. I want to talk about something you said about a few years ago. You actually got confirmation you're half white. Surprise.
Yeah.
Now, but what's interesting is that at the same time, your younger daughter, Rachel, was getting asked the what are yous.
Yeah.
And she was on the journey herself, right? Yeah. And interestingly, like you were told Pops was your father, even on your birth certificate.
Oh, yeah.
It says Pops is your father. And Rachel is Mariah's, your older daughter's biological sister. And it was said they had the same mother and the same father. And as soon as you saw Rachel, you're like, nah, no.
Yeah.
And
again, oh, sorry.
No, please go.
No. And again, Sarah, I mean, I wanted to sort of leave open that possibility, but there, you know, it wasn't just her complexion, it was facial features, temperament. They were just so dissimilar. But I knew from the first time, I'm like, I don't think they have the same dad.
Yeah.
Yet it says that on their birth certificates. Well, actually, it has my husband and my name on their birth certificates, but what their birth mother reported is that they had the same birth dad.
Okay, got you.
And so, as you know, if there are any folks out in the audience who have children who are adopted or adopted themselves, or know families that are formed through adoption, they know that search for identity, it's a lifelong journey for children of adoption. And so naturally, as my daughters began to question, like, you know, who their birth parents are, we told them from the very beginning, what we know is you have the same birth dad. But I began to see, you know, when she became a certain age, she did the same thing that I did. Began looking in the mirror and looking at a sibling who was said to be a full sibling and saying, I don't know, I don't see it. And so again, the book talks about sort of her journey as well, to find her own identity as we sort of determine, like, as we try to sort of support her in that way.
Right, correct. And one of my favorite scenes, may I say it or give it a
sure.
Okay. So with you, all of your life, you were like, what am I? How am I mixed race? You're saying I'm Black, but well, but there's one day, and Rachel's going through the same thing, and then the decision was made. She walks out of her room. It's 13. She's wearing a Black is Beautiful crop top. Her hair is picked out. She has these gold hoops. She's playing Drake. And then she's carrying a book called The Hate You Give, right? And it's about a Black girl caught in a white world. And you sympathetically, you're like, oh, Rachel, I know what you're going through. I didn't know my dad either. And she was like, psst, whatever, Poppy, I'm Black. I know I'm Black. I'm not confused. And you were like, okay. And that was it. And so she identifies as Black.
Yeah. And what I love about that scene, well, it was real. What I love about that the fact that it happened is, I think at a much earlier age than I was, she came to the realization that identity comes from within.
Mhm,
It doesn't
mhm.
come from what the outside world sees. And so she was very clear about who she is. So even today, when people ask, well, what are you? I identify myself as mixed race Black. And to me,
Yes.
that is meant to convey two things. That one, I do come from a mixed race background, but culturally, I identify as Black because of the family that I grew up in, the community that I grew up in. And so, having a Black identity is more than just skin tone or skin color, but each of us gets to define our own identity.
Yeah.
Folks don't get to decide for us. And so as mixed race people, we get to, and that identity may shift by nuance, like based
Yes,
on where we are in life and who we're in, but it's authentic to who we know we are. And
absolutely.
so it's, I also have to recognize that, to the world, I am white presenting. And so in many spaces in which I walk, folks might say like, well, gee, you're white to me. And but I have to know who I am.
Yeah,
I define who I am, and it's not based on how people perceive me.
absolutely. And but I will say, unlike your daughter, you do have to, in the book, you say, I have to remind people
Yeah.
that I identify as Black.
Yeah.
And there have been circumstances where you are camouflaged. You hear things. People are like, "Oh, I see you as white," or "Oh, I didn't mean you," or and that's something, being high Yella, that you go through, that other people, other mixed people, other Black people, darker, would not experience.
Yeah. And I've written about this not only in the book and other essays about, I recognize that, like, I carry a fair amount of white privilege because I don't have to worry about, I don't worry as much as my brother might have to worry if they are stopped, if there's a traffic stop, if they're pulled over by the police. I am not followed around stores. So that is the privilege, and I recognize that. I acknowledge it. And I hate to even call it privilege, but it is very real.
Yeah.
But I would say, conversely, there's a bit of a burden that I also carry as well. That when I'm in spaces, I might hear things and recognize the fact that people don't know that there's a person of color in the room. And I have to intentionally out myself. And that's okay. But I mean, imagine a world where no one has to, define in a room whether they're straight or gay or what their race is. But there have been many times in my life where I do have to remind people to mind their words. Because there's a person of color in the room.
Or I will say, even if there weren't, it's like, you don't need to be this, like,
exactly. I mean,
and why is it you that's saying it?
Yes, and where are other folks, speaking out? So.
Now this is something that didn't that wasn't quite a privilege. You have two Black presenting daughters. You and your husband are white presenting to a lot. And I remember, this is another way the past comes with the present. You were saying, when you would walk places with your mom, people would give you all looks like, who is this kid? What is this kid doing with this woman? And since you've adopted your daughters, a lot of people have not only given you looks, but had some big problems with you and your husband and these two daughters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to hear a little about that, please.
Yeah. Well, first I should say it has never happened in South Orange. So we actually adopted the kids when we lived in South Orange.
Uh-huh.
Never happened. People, I don't know, because it's, a progressive community. It's, very close to New York. People live with all different types of people around them. And so, but I call it sort of the mental map that people do. And I would notice it as we walked in airports, went into restaurants. People would try to say, well, how do these things work together? And what's interesting is that people would often sort of rationalize and come up with an explanation that was anything but. They must be brothers, they must be best friends. They must be divorced best friends living in the same house, raising their kids to save money. And I would literally have to, somebody once said that. I'm like, this is not Full House, right?
I am not John Stamos.
Yes, we are not Full House here.
Yeah.
And those were funny examples, but there have been other really traumatic examples of literally being policed, of having the police called on us because people would see us and there was something about us and they would wonder, well, here are these two adult men. And often this would happen, these two preteen or teenage girls, and I see them walking somewhere and they would start, are they trafficking these kids? What's happening here? Any of the folks on here, if they have teenagers, they get into an argument with their teenager on the street, people like, someone will walk by and go, oh, don't worry, they grow out of it.
Mm-hmm.
In one such instance, that happened to us, and the police were called.
Yeah.
Because they assumed something nefarious was happening. And I think about that, as traumatic as that was for me, imagine what that does to a child. What that says to them. Like, they question, do I really belong? Do we belong in this community?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it teaches them a lesson at a very early age that not all people are saying you look like a family.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I worry that they doubt again if they think that other people question whether we are a family. At some point, I wonder, does that sort of, and they're struggling, right, to fit into a family where their parents don't look like them. They have friends who have, parents who are opposite gender, and they have a family of same gender parents who don't look like them. And does that reinforce that fear? Like, are we really real? If other people don't, sort of like the Velveteen Rabbit, if other people don't feel like we're real, are we real?
Yeah. And you can relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, for folks who read the book, I write a lot about my siblings and about, a period of estrangement and sort of separation that I felt for them as I grew up, and will readily admit that I think that there was a part of my life where I thought, well, I can leave them behind, right? Because it wasn't the easiest of childhoods. And my siblings struggled as well with many issues. And I would say, my siblings who struggled with alcohol or drug abuse, those were the symptoms of trauma, right? So I had great empathy for them. But as they were struggling in their lives, I thought, well, there's a chance to leave that part of my history behind and them along with it. And then you start to question, well, is that my family? And, the book ends hopefully.
Yeah.
Because I think the lesson that I learned is you do have to, at some point, go back and reclaim some of your past in order to make a future for yourself and your own children.
Totally. And you know what not to do, as well as what to do. Like, you're not dismissing your daughter's asking questions, and it really sounds like, you're not gonna put them through that part
Yeah.
of just not giving them answers or giving them, freedom to look for these answers. Um, Steve, there are so many people and so many stories I love in this book. One of my favorites is the Christmas with your mom. Can you tell us a little bit about your mom and tell some of that story?
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the reasons why I think I survived, because I would say it was an element of survival, is, my mother had a great ability to compartmentalize. Some horrible, awful things happened to her. I mean, she was abused not only by her husband, but also experienced quite a bit of abuse from her own mother and her sister. But I think, she had the ability to compartmentalize and to strive for better and to want her kids to strive for better. And one of the ways that she strived for better is she would go all out for Christmas. Now, this was a woman who, again, just through the dint of her own sort of sheer will, was able to take go from a high school dropout to become an OR nurse, an operating room nurse. I mean, we're talking in the 70s, late 60s and 70s. But we did not make a lot of, we were a poor family, very poor. But Christmas was the one time of year where she felt like she could show her kids another life. And so, I remember I write about one Christmas in particular where, she bought appliances for people and luggage and jewelry and expensive clothing and like mail order surf and turf. And so we ate well that night and we looked great. But I guarantee you by the 26th, we were looking at an electric bill that, we were looking down the lines of an electric bill that would have our power shut off and, an empty tank of gas with no money and an empty refrigerator.
Yeah.
So I love that about my mom. It probably did not give us the best sort of financial management skills, but the lesson in there was that we were loved.
Yeah.
And that she would do whatever she could to find joy and to show us what a better life might look like for us.
I love that. And tell me now how, your husband, Todd, what does he think about all of this? The background you came from, raising your daughters, like, has he been, like, where has he been surprised? Where does he fit in? Tell me about Todd.
Well, I landed a nice Jewish boy, I like to say. I also call him the quintessential Boy Scout. He when people say, like, is he really a Boy Scout? I'm like, oh yeah, he was an Eagle Scout and in everything that he does.
Yeah, he actually was a Boy Scout as well.
He was a Boy Scout. Yeah. But I think, I here was somebody who came from a world so incredibly different than me. His parents grew up in Brooklyn, were, the generation, of, following the war, and nice middle class Jewish family, worked hard, sent their kids to college. His stories are nothing like mine, his family stories. And I think that I sometimes shake my head in wonderment, like, I've told him the truth about my family from the very beginning and my upbringing and my background and all the tough things that I've had to navigate. The one promise we did make to each other was that for many years we never told his family. We're like, they just will not. His poor mother will have a heart attack.
They're not ready.
They're not ready. They got ready over time. It took them many years. We would slowly just piece out different parts of my family story. And, his mom has since passed. His mom passed about a year ago, and she read the book before she passed, and was never anything more than a loving mother-in-law and welcoming to me as was the rest of his family. And, he's a product of his family. They were just good, solid, salt of the earth people. And Todd is cut from that same cloth.
That's great. Wonderful. Steve, I could talk about this book and with you for weeks on end. I want to, before we open it up to the questions, comments, what else haven't we discussed that you want people to know?
Yeah, I think if people read the book, I think one of the things that people often ask me is, what I don't want to take away one of the questions from the audience, because I'm sure this will come, is what I want people to, what I want to leave with people. And I think it's this. One is this theme of identity comes from within and not from without. Another is that you do sometimes have to reconcile with your past, no matter how difficult, in order to find your future. And I think the other is that so many families deal with these issues to different degrees: abuse, addiction, trauma. And we're so secretive about these things, they're shameful. And I would say that, if anything, I hope that people read parts of this book, and even if their families have gone through just a small portion of what my family went through, I want them to know that, shameful things could have happened, but it does not need to bring shame onto you.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Steve. Woo! Thank you so much. Thank you for being so vulnerable and open, and for sharing your story, and for sharing yourself. And thank you for having me interview you. It's been an honor. So I will get off the screen, but I will be here, and I will let Keisha do the questions.
Thank you so much, Steve and Sarah. What a wonderful conversation. Just to echo a comment that was in the chat from Tan Tigris, who says, "This is such an important and meaningful conversation for me." So they thank the organizers, South Orange Public Library, for having this event. And so you are very welcome, and we're so delighted to bring you, Steve, to South Orange. We would like to open up the time now for some questions. If anybody has any questions, or if you feel more comfortable entering them into the chat, you are welcome to do that as well. I will say, in the meantime, we do have a copy of the book available at the library. It is nicely covered and nice and shiny. You can check that out if you'd like. It's also available at our local bookstore, Words, over in Maplewood. So if you want to grab your copy there, you can do that as well. So does anybody have any questions for Steve or for Sarah?
I have.
Abrams. I'm going to go to the chat first. Kathy Abrams asks, where do you live now, Steve and family?
Yeah, but we live in the suburbs of DC, in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is a lot like South Orange, I'll tell you.
There was somebody who had a question before. I'm not sure.
It was me. I'm the Tan Tigress, also known as Rebecca. My name is Rebecca. And I wasn't sure if I was allowed to unmute or not, but I was curious. This is sort of personal, Steve. For you, you said that you feel like you're white presenting, and I just wondered, my husband and I are both mixed race, we're Black and white, we identify as Black, and, you know, he identifies as mixed race, and he's more fair skinned than I am, but I feel like, does it also depend, like, contextually where you are? Because I'm looking at you, you know what I mean? I'm like, and so I just was wondering if you would talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I would say far more people of color or Black folks identify me as perhaps being of mixed race background or something in different spaces and white spaces. again, people will categorize me as white presenting. It does depend on the context. And, this is not me like trying to categorize myself. Again, having been in spaces where people, say things and I'm like, oh, I don't think they think that there's anyone of color in this room. Those are the instances in which I'm like, well, gee, I guess they consider me white here. And I have to speak up unless folks and not let folks think differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Kathy?
Steve, if you're in a mixed space, do you think white people give your comments more weight than they would if your skin were darker?
I worry about that. It's hard to tell, but I work in sort of in the nonprofit sector now, and I'm constantly aware of and lead. I have led mixed teams. I've led teams primarily of people of color, and one of the things that I am always alert for are folks not giving space to people of color or to women. And I see it happen. I think I tallied this up once. Over 37 years, I've had 13 different jobs in probably 10 cities in 3 different sectors: the corporate sector, the nonprofit sector, and sort of quasi. And in all those spaces, I worry and watch for signs of that. And I have seen it happen where folks, of color struggle to be able to speak up and to be heard, and where women are struggling to speak up and be heard in mixed spaces. So it is a phenomenon, and it's something that I try to sort of watch for and police myself.
Is there any impact the other way around? If you're in a group of mostly darker skinned people, do they give you the same credit as everybody else?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, I have been in spaces of people of color and Black spaces, and people do not feel, and I can tell that they're like, well, gee, this person is white, and so they're, I would say it's neither. It's not a feeling of exclusion, but it is more not feeling recognized and feeling included. Because I think, people of color will recognize when you're in spaces with other people of color, there's a fluidity to the language. There's cultural references that are made. And there have been times I've had to sort of, out myself to Black folks as well, and be able to say, hey, I can come to the cookout. I don't have to necessarily, I don't carry a picture on, but I find ways to sort of out myself. And this issue of colorism, yes, it is a very, very real thing. It is absolutely a real thing. You would think that it was something that was, that we may have had to deal with sort of decades or centuries ago, but it still exists today.
Mm-hmm.
In the chat, Mia White says, you look like you could be Malcolm Gladwell's cousin.
Except he has more hair. Yeah, how should we approach these conversations in mixed company? I think just being our authentic selves and just speaking truth and speaking from our own experience, as much as we can. And I find, if you can do that and bring up issues in a way that's relatable to folks, to say, you know what, the way you're speaking makes me feel uncomfortable. You know, I wonder if this conversation would look differently if there were other people here, you know, who might not look like us, or if this was a more diverse group of folks. So that's a way to sort of bring this up. You know, in terms of like, you know, sometimes I find ways, you know, I recently started a brand new job, and in this virtual world, you know, one of the ways, you know, you want to introduce folks because you're not at a desk and there aren't family pictures sitting on, you know, your desk for folks to see who you are. I literally like, hey, I'd like to introduce you to my family. And I put up 2 pictures, and one was this picture and the other was my family with my husband and 2, and in that way, you know, it was like, don't go there. I'm a person of color, right? I'm gay. I have 2 kids, you know, who are, you know, are people of color. And in that way, I mean, there are ways in which, you know, again, I don't want to see I don't consider my identity a burden, but I try to find sort of natural ways to introduce myself in the way that other people do, to talk about, you know, their faith, you know, to talk to people about, you know, their politics as best as you can, to be able to convey to folks like, I need to tell you about my whole authentic self and what it is that I'm bringing to the space.
Steve, somebody asked, is it exhausting for you to have to explain yourself to everyone, or do you ever just not explain who you are?
It's a real tension that I have felt, and one I don't feel, you know, I would say as a younger man, it was, I think I felt it was a burden, and I'm ashamed because I would often wonder, well, gee, if I say something here, am I going to be treated differently? Are folks going to look at me differently? And I got to a point where I felt like I don't care. And if they do, that says something that's more about them than it is about me. And I don't feel that burden. I worry about the burden on my kids. You know, sitting at a restaurant table, you know, with my husband and my kids, and it's like, are these checks together or are they separate? Going into a doctor's office, who's here with you today? You know, well, obviously I'm a parental figure. I'm here, like, who do you think I am? You know, I'm not a stranger. I worry about the burden for my kids, to be able, you know, to identify like that they're adopted, that they have two gay dads. I think that's sometimes an unfair burden to put on children. Adults, I think, have more emotional intelligence and more resilience to be able to have those difficult conversations.
Difficult conversations. Oh boy. Well, you certainly have addressed that in this book, Hi Yella. And you know, one on the back of the cover, one of your reviewers says that Hi Yella is a story that's begged to be told. And I think that is true just to this conversation this evening. And it's a story that is personal to me. It's a story that your story that you've decided to share with us. And it's personal to so many people, especially in our audience this evening. And I think as readers will find, they'll find bits and pieces of them in the story as well. And I thank you for writing it. I thank you for sharing it. And we have one last question. How did you pitch it and sell the book? Like, who went for it?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I did have an agent, and that took a lot of time to find it, but the agent didn't sell it. I realized that sort of traditional publishing is very difficult. So I actually found an academic press that had a literary imprint and had a great track record of putting out high quality books that were well reviewed. Some were award winning. That was the University of Georgia Press. And so I went on their website and figured out how to submit it to them. And I would recommend that to anyone thinking of writing a book. Don't discount academic presses. They have great literary imprints, and don't discount small presses and independent presses. And it was a way for me to kind of get my story out.
Wonderful, wonderful. You know, I have a question for you. Do you have any plans on writing a young adult version of this book or a young adult novel of sorts?
Yeah, well, actually I do. And I have a book that is currently being pitched called Light Bright. And it is a young adult book. And it's meant to sort of deal with some of these same issues, but for a young adult audience, because I realize there are many young people, probably much like I was, again, dealing with the same issues that I did as a kid. Actually, my dream is to have it published as a graphic novel. So keep your fingers crossed. I'm working on that. We'll see. You'll be among the first to know.
Yay! Wonderful, wonderful. Well, folks, before we let Steve go, I'm just going to put a little plug in here. Steve is our first author this week, but we are looking forward to having Keith Wyloo on Thursday evening, and I hope that you'll join me along with the South Orange Village, our trustee Summer Jones, in this discussion and interview with Keith Wyloo. That's going to be this Thursday at 7 p.m. and he's the author of Pushing Cool: Big Tobacco, Racial Marketing, and the Untold Story of the Menthol Cigarette. Dr. Wyloo tells the intricate and poignant story of menthol cigarettes while pulling back the curtain to reveal the hidden persuaders who shaped menthol buying habits and racial markets across America. So as we're keeping with the theme of Black History Month and health and wellness, I feel like we searched within this evening and trying to dig into identity and a lot of self-work, which I think, Steve, for you, this was a lot of self-work for you and telling your story. And then on Thursday evening, we're going to look at the market around us and how, we as a culture are influenced by the market. So Sarah, thank you so much for a wonderful moderation.
Great.
Personable. I felt like we were just watching a podcast.
I feel like
this was just so much fun, and I thank you, Steve, for joining us. And you both are welcome to South Orange Library at any time. You're just a train ride away, and come on over. We'd love to have you. So thank you all for joining us this evening. And I see the comments in the comment section. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you once again, Sarah and Steve. You can actually find more information about Steve, his social media networks, and a little bit more about him. I'm putting in the link to his website there. It's just steve-majors.com. And you can also head on over to YouTube for Sarah. She is the host of Mixed Messages. And follow them. And you can come and check the book out at the library, Hi Yella by Steve Majors. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Keisha. Thank you, Sarah. Have a great evening, everyone.
Have a wonderful evening.